Howdy folks, Rig Doctor here, Uncle Mason. Today we're going to be helping out a friend of mine, Anthony Best, a local Californian. Anthony brought me his rig and had some major frustrations, as is evident in his YouTube channel.
Hello, I'm Anthony Best. This pedal board sucks.
Anthony's goal wasn't only to consolidate and downsize his rig.
There was definitely just a noise issue. It needs to drop in weight.
29 pounds, 8 ounces.
I'd certainly love to lose some space.
But it was also to give it more functionality, allowing him to use MIDI control of all of his Strymon pedals, in addition to some select overdrive, distortion, and compressors that he felt best fit with the sound that he was going for. And borrowing a little bit of inspiration from our mutual friend, Rhett Shull. Be sure to check out his video of a similar rig build that I did. Without further ado, let's get into it. I'll see you in the shop. My name is Mason Marangella. I build rigs for the industry's top professionals. Now, I'm teaching guitarists how to build rigs like the pros, with DIY tips, easy mods, and all the tricks of the trade. I am the Rig Doctor. We're beginning here with the flat pedal board, and if you've watched any of our other videos, you know that I prefer this style platform. This includes any of the angled varieties of pedal boards that are very popular. This has been the industry standard for over 20 years amongst professionals, perhaps even more, and I believe it to be the easiest for troubleshooting and roadworthiness. We're starting off by mounting any of the hardware to the platform of the pedal board itself. And the reason why we're doing this is because any of the debris that comes off from drilling in the platform or drilling in the volume pedal in this case, we don't want that getting into the pedals, so it just allows us to have the most room to work, and it allows us to get everything mounted on the top side of the pedal board without any interference. From there, I'm then going to mark out all of the pedals on the pedal board with a pencil and just trace out kind of the perimeter of each one of the pedals. And then from there, I'm going to use the different types of dual lock that I've linked below to put on both the pedal side and on the platform side. And the pencil helps me kind of know exactly where I'm going to place these pedals down on the pedal board. It's important when you're using a tier like this to constantly move it on and off of the pedal board as you're assembling, and this just helps you keep track of the spacing of everything, because often if you get pedals too close to the back of the tier, you might have knobs running into it. So this just makes sure that you have the right clearance as everything starts getting put down in its permanent place to make sure that everything is a good fit. One last thing that I should mention is that I'm putting on all of the 1/4-inch plugs that I'm going to be using throughout the pedal board, and the reason for that is so that I make sure as I'm putting things down, I'm leaving the appropriate clearance so I can run audio and power cables in the future and know that there's going to be enough space and clearance for those items, so I'm creating natural channels for those paths to flow into the power supply or into the switcher itself. Next, we're going to get into our power cable assembly and also the MIDI cable assembly. And I'm doing some pretty cool things here with power and with MIDI that I think is going to be really helpful for you. The first is thinking about power in terms of a flow. And I think that it's best to start furthest away from the power supply in terms of putting the molded ends of your DC power cables in the pedals themselves, and then working everything toward the power supply. So you have this flow of cables that are all working toward the same hub destination. And this just allows you to keep really neat lines, and you can use the enclosures of the pedals themselves as sort of your line to follow, or if you're not comfortable doing that visually, you can always put down a piece of painter's tape, and that'll help you keep your straight line into the power supply. And once I have everything appropriately running into the power supply, then I can cut all the cable lengths and strip everything and then solder it there at the pump. And if you need the extra space, you can always remove your power supply, and then you can place your third arm there so that you can do all of your cable assembly. Or if you need a little extra slack, you might cut maybe the last 1 or 2 zip ties on all the tie-down mounts leading into the power supply to give you a little bit more clearance so that you can move those cables around freely, so that you can assemble them a little more easily. As you become more advanced, you probably need less and less cable length in order to do this. I want to reiterate that using the molded ends on the pedals themselves is ideal, and the reason is that these are actually a little bit more robust than the hand soldered ends, because these housings are made out of plastic and there isn't a lot of strain relief. I prefer to put the newly soldered ends on the power supply because there's a lower probability that those will be damaged or bothered in that position, especially with the tier living on top of them, whereas the molded ends are a little bit more robust and can take a little bit more of a beating if in fact they did take a hit. I also want to talk about how I did MIDI on this, which is a little bit different, and if you watch some of our other videos you can hear me mention this, even in Rhett Scholl's video, which is a lot of you have come here from, is where I wire a MIDI splitter from the actual source of the initial MIDI output on the ES5. And essentially what we're doing is creating a splitter cable where we have 3 cables going into the MIDI out, and then it's splitting off into 3 individual cables going into each one of the Strymon pedals. And the reason that I do this is ordinarily you would need to have some sort of MIDI splitting hub, and there's a good one made by MIDI Solutions. But if you are comfortable soldering yourself, you can actually eliminate an entire box on your pedal board that splits the MIDI, and you can wire it straight out of the source of the cable. Another thing to note is that on MIDI for these sorts of pedals, you don't need to use all 5 pins, so the soldering load is actually a lot lower than you'd think. You only need to use the 3 middle conductors on a MIDI plug, so this really will eliminate some of the time because the outside pins are typically used for phantom power. When I'm done with completing the power, I usually get into some of the basic labeling of both the power supply and the switcher itself. Usually I do this at a point where I'm not going to be having a whole lot of activity over the switcher any longer, nor the power supply, so I like to just know where everything is going, and this just helps me sort of put names to the faces of all the pedals on the rig. So I'll use a Brother label maker, which I'll link here, and this is a standby for me that I use for all my labeling, and you can just interchange different types of label tape depending on what color you want. On the Strymon I'm using a clear tape with white print, and on the ES5 I'm using a black tape with a white print, and this just helps kind of blend in to the existing products where it doesn't look like it stands out too much. And it also lets me know where everything is, so I know which pedals are wired into each output on the supply, and I'll know all the pedals that are going into each one of the foot switches for the ES5. Now we're into the audio cables, and the most important thing I can recommend to anybody doing this is using some painter's tape to label every one of the connections. It is incredibly difficult to stay organized with a switcher unless you know where every cable is going. So I not only mark what's on one side of the cable, but what it's terminating into. So I might, for instance, say tuner out into ES5 input. Something like that, so I know which each side of the cable is doing, so it's very clear to me what's happening. Another thing that I do on the ends that are going into the actual switcher is I'll only solder one end to begin with, the side that goes into the pedal input or output, and then I leave the side going into the ES5 raw and just blunt cut at the end, and I put a piece of tape at the end telling me which connection that's going into, whether that's a send or a return, and which pedal it corresponds to and which loop it corresponds to. This makes it easy for me to stay organized as I'm assembling into the switcher itself, and I'm also treating this similarly to the power, where I have a signal flow. I'm starting on one extreme end of the pedal board, and then I'm moving toward the center in this case, which is where the switcher is located. So all the cables are going into the central hub in the middle of the pedal board. So I'm starting on the far left and the far right, and I'm working toward the center, and then I will have all of my cables going into the switcher that are uncut, and I will terminate those and solder those into the actual switcher. I have perfectly cut cables with no additional slack other than what I might need if I'm going to extend the cable to, say, a different jack orientation if I were to switch a pedal somewhere along the lines. One thing you'll also see me do here is putting a towel over some of the pedals, and the reason that I do this is because I don't want to scratch up any of the silk screening on some of the items. This just helps me keep it really clean and not damage any pedals in the process. We got it really nice and clean here. This turned out really great. Everything is looking about as great as we could expect. Everything on the power supply, super dialed, super neat. I'm real happy about this one. And then the bridge here, the infamous Strymon bridge as coined by Rhett Scholl. That's going together great. This compressor is going to go over here. I just have it off because I needed to have some space to make sure that all the cables fit. But it's pretty much ready to test here. Feeling good. So we have the kind of part of the switching pedal board in its full glory. I'm just going to test it out with what we have now. We've got it all plugged in. Got my handy LSL Super SATA coil. No pedals on, just straight through. Now I'm just going to mute it because it mutes the output. So here's everything off. Now I'm going to mute it. Unmute. Literally no detectable noise. I'm just going to unplug the whole pedal board. It's a deluxe reverb here. Off, on. Off, on. I'm literally hearing absolutely zero, not even like any noise difference whatsoever. And we're on about 5 on the amp. Let's put it through the pedals though, make sure that we're working. Compressor. Let's try BEOD. Let's try Tone Secret. We're all good. Let's take the volume pedal. Fuzz. Boost. We can add on the Strymon layer now. So now I've taken another supply to test the Strymon bridge. Remember, I already tested the compressor over there, so that's what's missing. Just testing, making sure all my cables are working properly, so when I put on the bridge, I'm not troubleshooting something that I don't already know about. So let's try these. That appears to work. That appears to work. Looks like we're working across the board. All in all, everything's working. We're gonna put it together, see what we got. So we're pretty much done here. Just gonna put on the final touches, get everything nice and dressed for the top row, and then we'll be ready to go. We'll be ready to have Anthony over. As I'm cleaning up the rig here, I want to clarify that we only have the compressor, distortion, and overdrive pedals wired into the actual switcher. The reason that we do this is to maximize the capability of the switcher, where we take the pedals that don't have any MIDI equipped functions and we put those in the loops, and then we put the actual MIDI pedals that can be controlled by the ES5 externally, because they can still change their patches. We also have the boost on there, which is external because it's just used for soloing, and then the fuzz, which is impedance sensitive, so we put that first so we don't have to worry about any issues with the switcher. So what we're doing is we're mounting the handle. You'll notice there's these little aluminum spacers, and that's just so we can raise up the handle enough so that all of the jacks clear when we put this on. So I'm going to drill this out. It's going to be perfect to protect all the inputs and outputs to sort of our volume pedal / interface hub right here in the corner. And there we are. So we've raised it up just enough where we have plenty of rigidity, but if we're going to be putting in any of our instrument cables that are going to be interfacing to either the amp or the guitar, we have enough clearance where ordinarily this wouldn't work. So, final touches from the Rig Doctor. You get the welcome wagon. All right.
Everything's on. There are 9 pedals.
There's no difference when we hit the mute switch. Everything's on right now. But even with the mute, which is on the output of this thing, no noise difference. I like that. Plugging and unplugging this, literally no noise difference whatsoever. So I'd say mission accomplished in terms of noise.
Yeah, the layout's perfect.
Because we have the ES5 doing all the MIDI controller changes for all of the Strymon devices. That's cool. Well, we did this one better than Rhett. Sorry, Rhett.
Sorry, not sorry.
So there it is. Anthony's happy. I'm happy. It was a great rig. We were able to combine a lot of stuff and accomplish his goals. He wanted to make the pedal board smaller.
Certainly love to lose some space.
More travelable, lighter weight.
It needs to drop in weight.
29 pounds, 8 ounces. We were able to do all those things, plus add more pedals, plus add MIDI functionality and programmability to the entire rig, If you like what you saw and you want to see more like this, do the things like subscribe, leave us a comment, and if you do subscribe, please be sure to hit that bell. That just gives you a notification every time we upload something new so that you can see the newest, greatest stuff. Thank you again. I am the Rig Doctor. Adios.